Before this hearing begins, I'd like to remind members that, per new guidance from the Office of the Attending Physician, you may remove your mask if you are fully vaccinated and when speaking into your microphone. For individuals that are not fully vaccinated, we encourage you to wear a mask in the committee room. Now I'd like to pass along some
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for witnesses for being here today. This hearing, entitled The Biden Administration's Efforts to Deepen U.S. Engagement in the Caribbean. What happened?
I think it needs to be read under the rules. Hold on. The downstream effects.
All right, we're starting all over. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. This hearing, entitled The Biden Administration's Efforts to Deepen U.S. Engagement in the Caribbean, will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any point, and all members will have 5 days to submit statements, strenuous materials, and questions for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. To insert something into the record, please have your staff email the previously mentioned address or contact the subcommittee staff. As a reminder to members joining remotely, please keep your video function on at all times, even when you're not recognized by the chair. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves, and please remember to mute yourself after you finish speaking. Consistent with H.R. 8 and the accompanying regulations, staff will only mute members and witnesses as appropriate when they are not under recognition to eliminate background noise. I see that we have a quorum, and I now recognize myself for opening remarks. I am glad we're holding this hearing to talk about the region that is too often overlooked. The countries of the Caribbean are among our closest neighbors, yet we frequently fail to pay enough attention to this region. As chairman of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee, I am committed to ensuring that we focus more on the Caribbean going forward. I also want to commend my friend Greg Meeks, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, who has been very clear since the start of this Congress that the Caribbean should be a top priority for the United States. I know Chairman Meeks agrees with me that the best way for us to show we are ready to elevate the Caribbean in our foreign policy is by sending vaccines to the region as quickly as possible. I applaud the Biden administration for its announcement that it will donate 80 million vaccines globally by the end of June. However, today I'm urging the administration to quickly step up our efforts in the Caribbean. Many countries in the region are relying on Chinese vaccines because we aren't providing any alternative. Other countries, like Haiti, have yet to distribute a single vaccine dose, while the pandemic claims more lives each day. Given the direct travel routes between the Caribbean countries and the U.S. and the close ties between our diaspora communities and our countries throughout the Caribbean, it is vital to U.S. national security that we help Caribbean overcome this pandemic. We should be proud of the fact that the vaccines produced in the United States are the most effective in the world. While I understand that the Biden administration wants to strengthen COVAX, I believe that we should be sending vaccines directly to countries in need. We should get the credit for the vaccines we donate. Beyond vaccines, we need to work with our Caribbean friends on the long road to recovery in the wake of the pandemic. Many of these countries depend heavily on tourism, an industry that has been crushed by the pandemic, which is likely to rebound slowly. In the Dominican Republic, we have a government that is eager to deepen engagement with the United States, but so far, they have had to rely on vaccines from China. We should step up and send vaccines to our partners in need. We should also help support their fight against corruption and deepen our security cooperation under the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative. In Guyana, where I traveled last year, we should work to ensure the proceeds of oil revenues benefit the entire population. As I said during the trip, we want to engage all actors in Guyana, including businesses, civil society, the current government, and the opposition to advance inclusive economic growth. The severe flooding that Guyana has faced in recent months is a reminder that climate change is having devastating impact on our friends in the Caribbean. We need to step up our efforts to support climate resilience and energy security in the region. In Haiti, I am deeply concerned about the gang violence that has spiraled out of control under a government that is no longer able to carry out its most basic functions. In just 2 weeks, over 8,000 women and children have been forced from their homes in Port-au-Prince due to this violence, according to the United Nations. I am glad that Secretary Blinken spoke out against a constitutional referendum there. We must do more to help the Haitian people overcome the economic and political and security crisis they are facing. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how we can deepen our economic and security cooperation with partners in the region and harness the Development Finance Corporation to counter China's influence in the region and help advance a rapid economic recovery. The COVID-19 pandemic has created tremendous challenges for the Caribbean, but it also provides an opportunity for us to demonstrate our commitment to this region. I truly hope that we will seize this opportunity. Thank you, and I now turn to the ranking member, Mr. Green, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Cyrus, really appreciate you holding this committee, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Thank you. Thanks for your service to the country. I'm glad we're hosting this hearing and convening this discussion. For too long, the United States Caribbean policy has lacked a strategic focus. The region is a key gateway to the United States. It's an important economic partner for trade and tourism. It's a vital component of U.S. national security, and it holds the largest bloc of Taiwan's diplomatic allies. I hope the full committee will work to prioritize the Caribbean Basin moving forward. In 2021, the region's future is bright, but not without significant challenges impacting both the United States and the greater Latin American community. The Caribbean struggles with persistent violence, transnational criminal networks, drug trafficking. In 2019, roughly 24% of the cocaine departing South America transited through the Caribbean Sea, including both maritime vessels and illicit aircraft. That's why the United States launched the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, or CBSI, a regional security initiative to reduce drug trafficking and promote safety and security. I'm proud to co-lead the reauthorization of the CBSI this Congress with Congressman Espaya. We must double down our efforts against drug trafficking that wreaks havoc in our region and the corruption that allows them to survive. Our bill helps do just that by providing the resources necessary to improve security cooperation and combat the criminal organizations that victimize their own countries as well as our own. The COVID-19 pandemic has decimated key resources, economic growth, trade, travel, tourism. According to the World Travel Tourism Council, the Caribbean was the world's most tourism-reliant region before the pandemic. But in 2020, These sectors took the largest hit, of course, experiencing a 58% decrease when compared to 2019. As countries continue to get vaccinated, we must prioritize resuming the long-standing U.S. Caribbean travel and tourism industries. And while the 2020 hurricane season wasn't that significant, 2021 remains an unknown, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has predicted that there may be as many as 10 hurricanes this season. An average season sees 7. I look forward to hearing from USAID on how you guys are working with regional partners on disaster preparedness and response management. 2020 also proved to be a pivotal year for the Caribbean's energy resources, with Guyana's oil sector growing and potentially providing an alternate to Venezuela's. The oil and gas sector is critical to their country and could transform it from one of the Caribbean's poorest countries to its wealthiest. The Chinese Communist Party has vastly increased its influence. Its influence in the Caribbean over the past 20 years, with 13 Caribbean countries having signed on to China's Belt and Road Initiative. The CCP has expanded its network of loaned-back infrastructure projects, tourism and telecom investment, and relationships with regional defense counterparts. China's disregard for the environment is a huge threat to the Caribbean tourism industry. That's why I'm drafting a bill to move supply chains away from Communist China and into the Western Hemisphere. Our dependence on China is a threat to our national security, and the Western Hemisphere must become more economically independent if we're to safeguard our future. The Caribbean is a region of strategic importance and numerous challenges. I'm hopeful that today's hearing can shed some light on the region as we work to prioritize our Caribbean partners. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Green. I will now introduce Ms. Laura Lockman. She is the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs. Ms. Lockman is a career member of the Seniors Foreign Service with over 30 years' experience in policy analysis and implementation. Most recently, she was the Director of the Office of Canadian Affairs. She has served in overseas assignments in Colombia, Venezuela, and Brazil, in Washington. In the Office of Cuban Affairs, wow, and the Bureau of South Asian Affairs. She holds a Bachelor of Arts from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Ms. Lockman, we welcome you to our hearing. You gotta tell me about this Cuban thing you had here. We will then hear from Ms. Barbara Feinstein. She serves as the Acting Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator within USAID Bureau of Latin America and the Caribbean. Ms. Feinstein oversees the agency's development priorities in Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean. Before joining the LAC Bureau, she was the Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator for Legislative Affairs in USAID Bureau for Legislative and Public Affairs. She holds a master's degree in international and public affairs from Princeton University and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of California, Berkeley. Ms. Feinstein, thank you for joining us today. Finally, we will hear from Ms. Heidi Fulton. She is currently the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Programs in the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement. Ms. Fulton most recently served as a Director of the Office of Mexican Affairs. Before that, she led the U.S. Embassy in Honduras as Deputy Chief of Mission, and then as Chief of Mission from 2016 to 2019. She also served as a Director of Counter-Narcotics at the Kabul Embassy in Afghanistan, and as a Counselor for Public Affairs in Quito, Ecuador. Prior to joining the Foreign Service, she served in active duty in Iraq. She retired from the U.S. Army Reserve in June 2020 after 28 years of service. She is a graduate from Boston College and earned her master's from Troy State University. Ms. Fulton, thank you for your service and for joining us today. I ask the witnesses to please limit your testimony for 5 minutes without objection Your prepared written statements will be made part of the record. Ms. Lockman, you are recognized for your testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Sires, Ranking Member Green, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify before you today on this important issue. For decades, the United States has partnered with the Caribbean people to promote stronger and more vibrant communities. Today, the Caribbean region is experiencing a sharp economic downturn caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. This has devastated government revenues and caused rising unemployment, which could bring more crime, irregular migration, and malign activity by state and non-state actors unless we continue our support. Through the U.S. Caribbean 2020 strategy, we have sought to increase and deepen U.S. engagement with Caribbean nations. We are now building on that strategy to guide interagency activities into the future. On April 21st, Secretary Blinken met with CARICOM foreign ministers to highlight our commitment to working with all countries in the region to advance bilateral and regional interests. We also actively engage Caribbean nations multilaterally to confront some of the region's most pressing challenges, including the growing threat to democracy and human rights in Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Haiti. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, on June 3rd, the administration announced plans for the global distribution of 25 million U.S. vaccine doses, of which approximately 6 million doses are designated for Latin America and the Caribbean. On June 21st, the administration announced its plan for the remaining 55 million of the 80 million doses President Biden pledged to allocate by the end of June, including an additional 14 million doses for Latin America and the Caribbean to be shared through COVAX. Moreover, the United States is purchasing an additional 500 million doses of Pfizer vaccines and donating them to 92 low and lower middle income countries as defined by Gavi's COVAX Advanced Market Commitment. The United States is an important commercial and trade partner of the Caribbean region. Through the Caribbean Basin Initiative, CBI, we maintain a positive impact on a number of Caribbean Basin economies. On March 22nd, the White House launched the Small and Less Populous Island Economies, or SALPI, initiative, which is a framework designed to further strengthen U.S. economic collaboration with island countries and territories in the Caribbean, North Atlantic, and Pacific regions. On energy, USAID's Caribbean Energy Initiative marks a planned 5-year, $25 million investment in a more sustainable, reliable, and resilient energy future for the Caribbean. We have also identified the need for diversification of energy supplies and promotion of U.S. exports to address challenges and promote Caribbean energy security. Through the State Department-led U.S. Caribbean Resilience Partnership, USCRP, we seek to strengthen Caribbean partner resilience to the impacts of climate change and severe weather-related events. USCRP guides efforts to advance and coordinate U.S. and partner country resilience around the objectives of supporting adaptation to climate change, enhancing regional disaster preparedness, providing geological hazards monitoring and disaster mapping, and developing resilient infrastructure. On education, we seek to build human capital in the region through increased educational activities by coordinating region-wide engagements through academic and professional exchange programs and massive online open courses, as well as increasing opportunities with diaspora and education stakeholders to build networks between the United States and the Caribbean. Finally, the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, CBSI, a regional security partnership with 13 Caribbean countries co-led by the U.S. government, CARICOM, and the Dominican Republic, remains the centerpiece of our security efforts. CBSI programs advance our goals to reduce illicit trafficking, improve public safety and security, and prevent youth crime and violence. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I now turn to you for your testimony, Ms. Feinstein.
Chairman Sires, Ranking Member Green, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the United States Agency for International Development. Over the past several months, the United States has heard from leaders across the Caribbean on their most pressing needs as they work to increase their resilience to natural disasters and climate change and overcome the challenges of COVID-19, be they health, economic, or security related. Caribbean leaders seek enhanced investment in disaster resilience and hurricane preparedness, increased support for crime and violence prevention, help to strengthen health and education, and above all, access to COVID-19 vaccines. And as a neighbor, partner, and friend of the Caribbean, the United States stands ready to respond, both because it is the right thing to do and because doing so is in our national interest. As we begin the hurricane season, USAID is well poised to support the region in its time of need, with a team of 100+ disaster experts located across the Caribbean and pre-positioned emergency relief supplies to prioritize humanitarian needs during major storms and other emergencies. USAID is already providing nearly $5 million to assist more than 20,000 people displaced by the recent eruption of the La Soufriere volcano in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And in Guyana, we are supporting more than 36,000 families as they recover from devastating floods. In Haiti, where escalating violence continues to paralyze economic activity and trigger the displacement of individuals and whole communities, USAID has provided more than $34 million to address emergency food security needs and prevent malnutrition, reaching over 580,000 Haitians. But while we support countries during their time of crisis, we are also helping the Caribbean to build greater resilience at the national, regional, and local levels by improving disaster risk reduction, promoting biodiversity conservation, generating data to improve climate forecasting and strategic planning, and supporting communities to plan for and adapt to shocks. USAID is also increasing energy resilience in this region, which, as you know, has some of the world's highest energy costs. Through our $25 million 5-year Caribbean Energy Initiative, the agency is working to help diversify the energy sources used in the region's grids, strengthen infrastructure to withstand major shocks, and enhance the ability of utilities to manage their grids for greater resilience. Of course, the most pressing issue facing the Caribbean today is COVID-19, whose impacts stretch well beyond the health sector. To date, USAID has provided more than $28 million in health, humanitarian assistance, vaccine support, and economic growth funding to respond to COVID impacts in the Caribbean. On June 6th, as my colleague mentioned, the White House announced its plans to purchase and donate 500 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines to 92 countries, several of which are in the Caribbean. And the region will also benefit from the White House's announcement of more than 20.6 million excess doses from the U.S. domestic supply. USAID is well positioned to complement these deliveries with technical assistance to support equitable vaccine distribution and planning. As members of this committee are well aware, high rates of crime and violence remain endemic in the region. Through the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, USAID is helping to improve the efficiency of judicial systems, promote governance, and fight corruption. Importantly, our work also helps to provide at-risk youth from the highest crime municipalities with educational, economic, and social opportunities to ensure that they can live productive and peaceful lives. In St. Kitts and Nevis, for example, we've seen a sizable increase in target communities' perceptions of safety as a result of our efforts, with perceptions increasing from 54% in 2018 to almost 70% just 2 years later. And approximately 60% of Eastern and Southern Caribbean youth who completed USAID-sponsored workforce development programs have now secured employment in the retail, hospitality, and tourism sectors. Yet while these results are heartening, we recognize that much more remains to be done. And with this committee's strong support, we stand ready to continue to respond. To that end, it is important to note how our model of assistance differs from others, namely that of the People's Republic of China, which furthers dependence or unsustainable debt. By contrast, the U.S. model is one of partnership with the countries in which we work. Our assistance promotes a country's own development path, consistent with our shared values and interests. Again, thank you for your commitment to the Caribbean, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Ms. Fulton, you are recognized for your testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Series, Ranking Member Green, distinguished members of the panel, thank you for calling this hearing and for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the progress of U.S. diplomatic and foreign assistance in the Caribbean, our third border. Today's hearing comes at a difficult time for our Caribbean partners who face violent crime and high homicide rates driven by increased gang-related violence, illegal firearms trade, and impunity as a result of ineffective criminal justice institutions. Our security partnership with our Caribbean neighbors remains fundamental to combating these shared challenges that threaten the safety and security of our citizens across the region and in the United States. The mission of the Department of State's Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, or INL, is to keep Americans safe by countering crime, illegal drugs, and instability abroad. Under the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, or CBSI, which was established over a decade ago, we work in partnership with 13 countries and regional security institutions to build law enforcement and justice sector capacities to reduce drug trafficking and criminal threats to the United States, to enhance citizen security, and to hold criminals accountable. While the challenges are immense, I am confident that the partnerships we have developed under CBSI and bilaterally with Haiti have better positioned our Caribbean neighbors to confront drug trafficking, undercut the profits of gangs and criminal groups, and to build more effective criminal justice institutions. Maritime security is central to INL's efforts to combat drug trafficking in the region. For several years, INL has partnered with the Coast Guard on a multi-pronged maritime capacity building program to improve vessel maintenance, develop interdiction capability, and enhance investigations and prosecutions. Regional Coast Guard advisors based in the Dominican Republic support sustainable improvements for interdiction operations and investigations, and will soon expand across efforts across the region. Combined with the Coast Guard technical assistance and training, in fiscal year 2021, these joint efforts have already contributed to 29 drug interdictions and 159 individuals arrested by Dominican Republic partners. We are also working to enhance sub-regional cooperation, improve maritime domain awareness, and develop a regional maritime security strategy. We prioritize building partner capacity to target illicit finance and undercut the profits of gangs and criminal groups that drive violence and instability across the region. In partnership with the National Center for State Courts, INL is implementing a civil asset recovery project that works with partner governments to draft model legislation and train financial investigators, attorneys, and judges. The 6 CBSI countries implementing such legislation have recovered more than $1.27 million in cash and $2.5 million in property since 2013, which is reinvested into strengthening Caribbean security criminal justice sector institutions. A host of larger actions, valued at more than $60 million, are currently underway. Building the capacity of regional institutions is critical to INL's efforts in the Caribbean. The Caribbean Communities Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, or IMPACS, the Regional Security System, and Operation Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, our decades-old trilateral counter-narcotics partnership, are each integral partners in multiplying and sustaining our programmatic efforts. Since CBSI's inception, annual cocaine seizures in the region have increased more than 200%, due in part to the strong regional collaboration which is enabled by the program. INL recently transferred management of CBSI Connect, a regional online law enforcement training program, to IMPACS. Since 2012, INL has supported the development, maintenance, and installation of a CBSI Connect at 17 Caribbean law enforcement academies, including all CBSI countries, Belize, and Haiti. CBSI Connect provided Caribbean criminal justice sector institutions connectivity to ensure key functions continued during COVID-19 lockdowns and convinced previously hesitant justice sector actors of the platform's value to ongoing training. In Haiti, we continue to invest in the professionalization and expansion of their national police, which since 2019 has been the sole guarantor of citizen security. The Haitian police continues to mature even as they face intensifying criminal gang threats to law and order and citizen security. Transnational crime, violence, and insecurity are threats that we share with our Caribbean neighbors and require our coordinated and sustained efforts. Where our programs are matched with committed partners in the region, we see results, and we will continue to work to ensure the effectiveness of future programs to build capacity and enhance regional security cooperation. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We will now go to questions. I guess my first question is to you, Ms. Lackman and Ms. Feinstein. You know, I welcome the news that the Biden administration is doing 30 million vaccines that it will send out by the end of June, and they will go to Latin America and the Caribbean. How are they distributing these vaccines in this region?
Okay, thank you very much for that question, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we are now in the process of working with partners in the region, both on
Who are the partners?
CARICOM's Public Health Agency, CARPA, as well as directly with certain of the bilateral governments to work out the modalities for the transfer of these vaccines. So these discussions are ongoing right now, and we're trying to make sure that we can ship them in a way that they arrive safely and that they maintain their effectiveness, since, as was pointed out earlier, the U.S. does produce the most effective vaccines in the world. And we're working with the recipient countries to make sure that they have the means to store them, in the proper conditions and distribute them. And in that regard, USAID is helping on the ground.
Thank you. Just to complement that response, I would add, so the White House, as we speak, is working very closely with the State Department, with Gail Smith's office, as well as USAID, CDC, et cetera, and partners on the ground to try to figure out how to navigate the complex modalities of all of this. Part of it depends on the particular vaccines that are used. Obviously, as you know, if Pfizer is going to be used, then that requires ultra cold chain storage and certain levels of logistics. If different ones are used, then that requires different modalities. So these are all questions that right now the White House is working through, and my understanding is that there's a commitment to the allocations being completed by June, and then shortly thereafter we will expect to see those deliveries begin. And just to reference, as my colleague said, USAID is working with these host country governments, with CARICOM in particular, to work on equitable distribution strategies and to try to help with the strategic planning associated with
I don't
that.
have too much time left, but here's where I have a problem. You have China going in and giving directly to these islands the vaccine. They take all the credit. Why can we do the same thing and take the credit instead of giving it to COVAX or CARICOM? They may be great organizations, but I'm not looking to build those organizations. I'm looking to build our position on the Caribbean. And our position in the Caribbean should be that we should send the vaccines directly to these people, let them know that it's the United States that's helping. And the administration probably wants to build up COVAX or whatever, but I'm not interested in doing that. I wish the administration would directly do that. And when we have planes, we do things better than most people. Our vaccine is the best vaccine. And China goes into, for example, Dominican, they're giving 35,000 vaccines. They have 70,000 people on the whole island. I mean, why can't we do that and get the credit? That just bothers me too much to let it go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think your concerns are very well founded in terms of the United States being able to get the credit for the generosity of these vaccines. And all I can tell you on that front is I know the White House is very focused on communication strategies that are tailored to each donation that goes out to ensure that it is very clear to the people of those countries that this donation is coming from the United States government. In addition, all of the vaccines that are going through Gavi COVAX will be branded with the American flag on there as a further indication that this is coming from the United States.
You know, that's one good step. Now, the other issue that I have all these loans that China is giving to these islands. What are we doing to offset that in some of these places so they don't take all the credit from China, you know?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question, Mr. Chairman. You know, the United States is the natural partner of the Caribbean due to our strong historical, economic, commercial, cultural ties.
It's way past, and I want to make sure that the other members have the same amount of time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Congressman Green?
Well, actually, Chairman, that was my question number one for Ms. Lockman. But sort of continuing on that theme with the CCP, as we move supply chains from China to Latin America and specifically the Caribbean, what are some segments or particular industries that you think the Caribbean would, American companies and other companies should look to move to the Caribbean, both for opportunity there and decreasing our dependence on Chinese manufacturing?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ranking Member, for that question. We agree the United States cannot address its supply chain vulnerabilities alone. Even as the U.S. makes investments to expand domestic production capacity for some critical products, we must work with allies and partners, including in the Caribbean, to secure supplies of critical goods that we will not make in sufficient quantities at home. So we will work with allies and partners to strengthen our collective supply chain resilience while ensuring high standards for labor and environmental practices are upheld. And
Is there a particular industry or segment that you think we could target for moving to the Caribbean area? That's really my question.
Right, and I think this is something that, along with other U.S. government agencies, we can be looking at and work in tandem with you as well to identify some of those sectors.
Yeah, it's time to roll the sleeves up and get it done, right? So let's motivate the garment industry, or let's, certain agricultural industries or other things. We got to get manufacturing specifically moved from China to Latin America. But Ms. Fulton, a quick question for you, and first, thanks for your service in the Army. What aspects of CBSI have seen the greatest success, and how can our security cooperation be improved in the Caribbean?
Thank you, sir. Overall, cocaine seizures from CBSI countries have risen substantially since the beginning of the initiative, rising from 5.5 metric tons in 2010 to a high of 22.6 metric tons in 2017. Even last year, despite COVID constraints, more than 17 metric tons were seized. So there has been a tangible impact in terms of...
That's a 400% increase.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, sir. As the partnership has matured, we have been focused on strengthening regional security institutions so as to enable our partners to more effectively confront the challenges that they face. And this is where our partnership with CARICOM Impacts has been, I think, quite successful. The training that has been sustained through the COVID period on the virtual platform that I mentioned during my remarks, I think has substantially enabled partners despite the challenging conditions of the pandemic. We have continued on with our work in areas, for example, like the Dominican Republic, which is a location where approximately 90% of the cocaine that does go through the Caribbean, of the percentage that you mentioned earlier, it does go through the Dominican Republic. We've yielded a substantial increase in cocaine interdictions. The government of the Dominican Republic has performed admirably in this regard. Their security forces seized more than 15 metric tons in 2020, and then so far in 2021, they've already apprehended 5.2 metric tons. And so those increases alone are really quite remarkable. We've donated vessels to the Bahamas that have been used in intelligence-driven interdiction operations, and we are working on financial crime measures across the Caribbean to enable countries to implement asset seizure legislation and then invest the proceeds of the assets that they seize back into their systems so as to continue the strengthening and sustainability. Dominican security forces, again, another highlight of the work that they're doing in cooperation with U.S. law enforcement. They dismantled one of the largest drug trafficking organizations in the Caribbean with the capture of OFAC-sanctioned kingpin Cesar Peralta in Colombia in December of 2019. Narcotics seizures are one important component of the, I would say, the fruits of the collaboration that we have had with CBSI. But we've also made investments in citizen security and rule of law. The INL-supported 911 system, the 911 system that we have partnered with the Dominican Republic to implement, has been an essential component to reduce violence and increase public support for the police in that country. In the Trinidad and Tobago, INL's resistance and prevention program has reduced homicides in Enterprise, which is a high crime community in that country.
What
We
I might,
have-
if I could,
Yes,
what I
sir.
might do is just have you, if you could submit just to send me a letter or submit a letter for us to put into the record. I'm out of time.
Yes, sir.
But I want to hear more about what you're saying, because this is the kind of success stories that we need to hear about. So thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Congressman Castro?
Thank you, Chairman. I want to express a concern that I expressed to Gail Smith and others at USAID and others at the State Department within the last few weeks about the donation, the sale of vaccines to countries around the world, including in Latin America and the Caribbean. And that is, I'm concerned that as we're making these donations or sales or in COVAX work, that we're not sufficiently requiring countries to put forward a strategic plan to be successful, and not just in receiving the vaccines, that's one thing, but as we know from our own experience domestically, it's one thing to have the vaccines, it's quite another to have the infrastructure in place to successfully get those vaccines in arms. And my concern is that in a year or two or 3 or 4 or 5, there are going to be all these stories about how we donated 1 million vaccines somewhere and only half of them got used. There was the case of, I believe, the Democratic Republic of Congo that sent back 1.1 or 1.3 million vaccines that they weren't able to use. And so, I mean, if you think about it, if it was tough in American urban areas to be able to make sure that all of these vaccines were used in a timely manner, I can only imagine the challenges around the world in other places, both in urban and rural settings, to actually have those vaccines be effectively deployed. And so I say that just for anybody that's having conversations in the administration internally about this issue. I have a really, and not to lay blame, I think that we're, obviously we're in a very big hurry to make sure that we get vaccines out around the world, which we should be. But I'm also concerned that once they get out, I'm wondering what the effectiveness rate is going to be of actually deploying them. But that's separate. I probably have time for one question because I've gone on long about that. But Ms. Feinstein, I have a question for you. Countries in the Caribbean have expressed interest in accessing support from the DFC for critical energy infrastructure investment, but per capita income levels for many countries are above DFC thresholds. And so how has the restriction on the DFC working in upper middle income countries affected the U.S. government's ability to undertake development projects in the Caribbean and in Latin America?
Thank you very much, Congressman, for that question. If I could briefly touch upon vaccines and then also DFC.
Sure.
Just to say, very much validating all of the comments and concerns that you have articulated, and they very much echo all of the conversations going on within USAID at this point and among practitioners who work on these issues. While, as you mentioned, it is absolutely urgent and vital that we provide these vaccines, we need to do so in a way that is equitable, that gets to especially marginalized and vulnerable populations, that is done so in an efficient manner, and also getting at issues around vaccine hesitancy, which is a major concern also in the Caribbean as well as in other countries. So to address these issues, I would note that actually a congressional notification went up yesterday for American Rescue Plan funding to provide USAID with the resources to work with individual countries on their strategic planning to try to get at some of these issues. That being said, these are monumentally difficult challenges, so we are going to, I certainly give you our commitment. We will work as hard as we can on it and with the smartest people in this field to try to have that kind of impact so that these donations are not for naught and don't go used or wasted.
Well, and again, and I know that we're all concerned about it, and not to diminish your work or even to lay blame, because I know we're trying to move as fast as we can. But you're right. I think we need to focus on working with the countries to really making sure that they can get their vaccines into arms. Again, it was a big problem in American cities for us So,
Now, with regard to the DFC and the impediment in terms of the high income thresholds, it is certainly an obstacle. I think the places where we have seen DFC investments, particularly in terms of loan guarantees, are those countries like Haiti, like Jamaica, where we don't have the same kind of obstacles or impediments. On energy in particular, as I mentioned in my testimony, USAID began 2 years ago now this Caribbean Energy Initiative, where we are making the kind of investments to help countries with their transition to renewable energy. For example, in Barbados, we're helping them to carry out their strategy to shift to renewables by 2030. We've helped the country of St. Lucia to revise their grid to allow for use of renewable energy. So there's a lot of work we're doing in that space. But if we could work more closely with the DFC in that area, that certainly would be beneficial.
no, wonderful. Well, thank you for both those responses. And I'm just about out of time, so I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you. Congresswoman Salazar?
Thank you. And thank to all of you for being here. And I would like to ask you a few questions, Mrs. Lockman, about Cuba. You know, the American consulate has a skeleton crew in Havana due in part to the sonic attacks in 2017, but you have 100,000 Cubans waiting for a family reunification visa interview. Guyana is a possible destination for that interview, but the plane ticket is $7,000 in the black market. My district in the heart of Miami is inundated with relatives begging to finalize that process. One of them is Hector Barrios. He's a 10-year-old child with leukemia, and the Nicholas Children's Hospital is waiting to give him treatment but needs a visa to come into the United States. Nonetheless, on May 19th, the American consulate opened its doors to get visas to 30 baseball Cuban players to come to play in West Palm Beach. That is grotesque. It's embarrassing. So I just would like you to explain to me who makes these decisions. Yes to baseball players, but not to sick kids with cancer.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for your question. I will take this back to my colleagues who focus on Cuba at the State Department, and we will work with your staff to make sure that we get a full answer to you.
But didn't you know this reality? 30 baseball players versus sick children. You didn't know this?
No, I do not follow Cuba myself, ma'am, but we will definitely.
But you are the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs, and Cuba is part of the Caribbean. Don't you think that this is embarrassing for any administration?
Yeah, I will definitely take this back, Congresswoman, and we will be in touch as soon as possible.
And
with
I would
staff.
very much, would like you to explain to me who makes these criteria, because it affects the heart of my district. I'm not being histrionic. I am just speaking for thousands of people who feel what I'm telling you. Now, when will the State Department designate another country to conduct the final interview so these people can come, as the law says, to the United States with that family reunification visa? Do you know?
I personally do not, and again, we will work very closely with your staff on all of these questions to get you adequate answers.
But I really would like the State Department and your office to do work very closely with us.
Understood.
And do you know the answer to Guantanamo? Can we open the Guantanamo naval base so those Cubans can come and conduct that final interview on Cuban soil? Is that a possibility?
Again, we will definitely get you answers to all of these questions.
But I'm a little bit appalled, Mrs. Lockman. I'm sorry, you do not know what's really happening in Cuba vis-a-vis the United States and what's happening in the embassy and the consulate and the sonic attacks and the skeleton crew. And are you aware? What are you aware of?
Yes, in my role, I follow the Caribbean, which is CARICOM, and the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And there are other individuals who cover Cuba in the Western Hemisphere Bureau.
And you are not the person.
Correct.
So who would that person be?
Well, the Acting Assistant Secretary, Julie Chung, is ultimately responsible for the Bureau. And then Emily Mandrala is the Deputy Assistant Secretary following Venezuela and Cuba.
So do you think that maybe my office or myself could have an interview with them as soon as possible? Because maybe there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we could definitely find a visa for this child named Hector Barrios, who has leukemia and is dying.
We'd be happy to work with you on that.
That's very gratifying, and I feel much better that the State Department has the intention of working with us in solving this type of visas. And I thank you, so I yield back.
Thank you. Congressman Levin?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this important hearing, and thanks to all of our witnesses. I'd like to direct my first question to Ms. Lockman regarding elections that are slated to take place in Haiti later this year. Secretary Blinken appeared before our committee earlier this month and made clear the Biden administration opposes the constitutional referendum that had been planned for this month, which thankfully has now been postponed. Secretary Blinken also said, and I'm quoting, "We still think there's a possibility and an opportunity if the appropriate steps are put in place to have an election." As you know, I've been extremely concerned that free and fair elections in Haiti this year are simply not possible. So I'm pleased the administration is looking closely at the conditions on the ground there and what they might mean for elections and their credibility and, frankly, their possibility. Ms. Lockman, the Provisional Electoral Council, the CEP, was not created through legitimate process under the Haitian Constitution. Voter registration is way behind. Kidnappings, rapes, murders, and general impunity are widespread. De facto President Moïse failed to organize elections for other levels of government and is seen as having overstayed his mandate by the vast majority of the organizations and constituencies that make up Haitian civil society. Would you tell us more specifically what the State Department would consider the appropriate steps that would have to be put in place for Haitian elections organized under Moïse this year to be considered free, fair, and credible?
Thank you very much, Congressman, for those questions. And if I can take them maybe in sequential order, you referenced first the referendum. And what you understood from Secretary Blinken is exactly the case, which is that we do not support the constitutional referendum. And we believe that the focus of the Haitian government and Haitian society should be squarely on holding free and fair legislative and presidential elections this year. Obviously, it's up to the Cuban people whether they seek to reform their constitution or not, but we believe that it should be done in a process that's open, participatory, and transparent, and that so far it has not been. And again, the focus should be on elections. And granted, there are serious concerns regarding security and preparation for elections in Haiti. We are monitoring those circumstances. We are working with the United Nations, with the Organization of American States, with the core group of countries, to with the Haitian government to try to move towards having in place the conditions that would allow for elections this year. We believe it's extremely important, first of all, to end rule by decree, which has been going on since January of 2020, and to have a democratic transfer of executive power in February of next year. And then the legislature needs to be reinstated, and you can only do that through elections. So we will continue to work in every way we can to try to enable elections this year. I'm sorry, you're next on the...
Well, yeah, let me just say that having elections for election's sake when they're not credible and won't work just delays the restoration of democracy. We have to accept reality and do what's been done in the past in Haiti where things got into this kind of a situation and have some kind of a provisional government that can restore democratic conditions, because any election held under the de facto President Moïse just simply will not be free and fair and credible. And so you're actually, whatever good intentions, we're just going to be delaying the actual restoration of democracy. Let me move on and ask about vaccines and efforts to control the COVID surge, and I'll direct these questions to you, Ms. Is it Feinstein or Feinstein? What's your flavor? I want to get it right.
Whichever you prefer depends
Oh,
on
my
the member
goodness.
of my family.
Okay. I'm grateful that the Biden administration has recognized the dire need for vaccines in Haiti and other countries and has made Haiti a priority in its distribution efforts. But I worry that vaccines aren't making it to Haiti quickly, and that once they do, I'm concerned about obstacles around distribution efforts in country, as my colleague Mr. Castro was referencing. Can you share with us any updates about when you expect? Let me ask you a few questions. You can sort of answer them in however you want. First of all, when do you expect promised vaccines to reach Haiti? And then what is being done now to ensure that once the vaccines are delivered, distribution plans are in place to make sure they reach those who need them and to make sure they aren't diverted? And then I'm hearing a lot from colleagues in the medical field, in hospitals, especially in parts of our country that have big Haitian American communities, about desiring to get vaccine doses that may go to waste in our country and get them to Haiti. And I wonder if USAID is working with, partners like hospital systems. I hear from people who run hospitals in Haiti who say, give us the doses, we can distribute them, and there are just no doses in sight for the Haitian people. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if it's okay for her to answer the question. I realize I've
You
gone
just used up the second question, the second 5 minutes.
I think he says you can answer. That's my interpretation, so go for it.
Thank you, Congressman, for those important questions. So with regard to vaccines, we are as frustrated as everyone is by the delays in the delivery of the AstraZeneca vaccines, which we understand have been caught up due to supply chain issues in India and obviously the needs in India. So I unfortunately don't have a specific date for when those will arrive. I don't know if my colleague has updated information. I wish I did, but regrettably we do not have that. With regard to helping Haiti on COVID more broadly, and then with regard to vaccines, we have ongoing programming right now that we, shortly after the pandemic began, to help with risk communications, water and sanitation, and perhaps our biggest effort there has been related to oxygen, which, as you know, is absolutely critical for providing that kind of support when somebody has a severe case of COVID. And in fact, since you know the country so well, I would share that just a few weeks ago, we had a nightmarish situation over the weekend where Father Rick from the St. Luke's Hospital reached out to USAID and said that oxygen that was supposed to be headed his way, you may have been tracking this situation in real time, was caught up by gang violence at the docks, where in fact the shipments could not actually proceed to the hospital. It was a terrible situation. We looked to see, could DOD do anything? No, they weren't able to. What could USAID do? In the end, thankfully, some kind of agreement was reached, and the oxygen was able to get to St. Luke's, and the people who were needing it that weekend were able to survive as a result. Thankfully, as a result of that crisis situation, we were able to work with the Ministry of Health in Haiti and provide dedicated oxygen supply on site to the hospital. And we have additional resources where we are surging more support for the oxygen ecosystem into Haiti. With regard to the vaccine distribution plan, right now, that is being handled by CDC, the kind of technical assistance that we are providing in the Eastern and Southern Caribbean and elsewhere. CDC is providing that kind of technical support. However, as I mentioned in the congressional notification that went up yesterday, we expect to also have additional resources for AID to be able to work with the government of Haiti. However, as I mentioned to Congressman Castro, and as you well know, the challenges are immense. In addition, regular challenges anywhere are difficult. In Haiti, given the security situation, possibility of diversion, gang violence, et cetera, it only makes it that much more difficult. But as we have more information, happy to share that with you.
Thanks very much. And let me just say in closing, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Feinstein, I want to work with you on the energy transition, because I think we have to think a lot bigger about it, and it could be transformative for our relationships with the countries throughout the Caribbean and Latin America more broadly. But the best answer to all the anxiety about Belt and Road and the Chinese is not to be reactive or defensive, but to, in a big-hearted and broad-shouldered American way, go in and partner with these countries and go way, way beyond what we've done in terms of offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, microgrid, storage, and so forth. So let's meet separately about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your forbearance. I yield back.
We're going to go down a second round. since Mr. Levin started the second round already. We took a trip last year to Curacao. And one of the things that we saw there was the impact of the Venezuelan migrants. It was almost a crisis. They kept complaining how a country that had low crime, all of a sudden, crime was a problem. Obviously, because they couldn't work. And they couldn't find work, so it didn't help the situation. I was just wondering, what has been the impact of our assistance to the Caribbean to support Venezuelan migrants and refugees, and what more can be done? Because we, as they hop from island to island, obviously the same situation is going to be developed. So I'm just wondering what impact has our assistance to the Venezuelan migrants made? Anyone?
Maybe I could start and then pass it to my colleague. Yes, you are absolutely correct. Nearly 5.6 million Venezuelans have fled their country. And it is a U.S. priority to provide humanitarian aid not only to those in the country, but to those who have had to flee. So we will continue to work with other partners to get humanitarian assistance to these individuals. And in that regard, perhaps I could turn the microphone over to my colleague from USAID.
Thank you, and this is a very critical issue, Mr. Chairman. Glad that you raised it. Our efforts from USAID have primarily been focused in Trinidad and Tobago and in Guyana on the issue of Venezuelan migrants. In Trinidad and Tobago, we had a program that literally just ended last year where we worked with the receptor communities to try to reduce conflict between the migrants, to try to increase better understanding between those communities, to provide psychosocial support also to the migrants who had come, access to education there. We also funded a hotline for migrants to report cases of abuse because, as you know, they are very much victimized in TNT and in other places that they have migrated to. And the good news there is that many of those practices and processes have been taken over by local agencies, by other partners. I know that the State Department's Bureau for Population, Refugees, and Migration also has programming in many of these countries. In Guyana, our focus has been more on gender-based violence with regard to Venezuelan migrants, since that has been a terrible problem there. And in that sense, we've been connecting migrants with counseling, financial aid, food support, employment opportunities, cross-cultural exchange, legal support, and classes in English. So our efforts there continue, though obviously this is a problem that is not going away anytime soon and warrants increased resources and attention.
Do you know anything about the refinery in Curacao at all? This is still functioning, or at one time it wasn't? Does anybody know? No? Okay, that was a big issue.
Mr. Chairman, we're happy to get back to you with information on that.
Good, thank you. Congressman Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My next question is for Ms. Feinstein. Obviously, disaster resilience is better than disaster response. Can you tell how we're helping for resilience against hurricanes, et cetera?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Congressman. So as you said, this is something that we see as a critical investment. Clearly, USAID has and will continue to provide responses in the event of disasters. However, if we can shore up these countries' actual resilience, and that takes a number of forms, then we will be in much better shape, as will they. So to give you a few examples, we have worked at the regional level, and what that has looked like is providing support for the Caribbean Emergency Management Agency, Disaster Emergency Management Agency, SEDEMA, to strengthen their own protocols, to strengthen their own coordination abilities, to strengthen their own abilities to forecast, to provide early warnings to countries within the CARICOM region. so that they can plan better responses to that. So we've been shoring up their capacity again, so it's not just the United States going in every time. Similarly, another institution in the region is the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, and we've helped to get them accredited in that field on an international basis. So again, they have state-of-the-art systems for the kind of weather forecasting that will assist countries in the region. At a local level, we're also working through the Inter-American Foundation to work with small communities, and they do so on a cost-matching basis, whether that's in-kind or actual resources, to work on disaster planning at the local level, and also on community resilience projects, for example, mangrove nurseries or other coastal restoration, coral reef restoration, et cetera, so that they can do their part with regard to resilience. And obviously, we recognize this isn't just a disaster issue, it's also critical to the tourism industry, as both you and Chairman Sires have mentioned. And so in that sense, we also have done work in the energy space in Jamaica and elsewhere to make transitions to renewable energy and other aspects to try to allow, whether it's hotels or other institutions, to spring back more effectively from disasters.
Good. No, that's great to hear. I'll tell you, Mr. Chairman, I thought we had lots of acronyms in the Army. USAID and the State Department have just about as many. Ms. Lockman, a question for you. It would appear that over the past 15 or so years, China's economic influence in the Caribbean area has gone from $1 billion to $8 billion. Obviously, that's a concern for us. You and I asked you about the CCP earlier. Getting a little more specific, are there any free trade agreements or preferential agreements that we can establish that would help us be the go-to for the Caribbean and keep China from pushing its influence into the region?
Okay, thank you very much for that question, Mr. Representative. We do have, of course, trade programs, and that is under the Caribbean Basin Initiative, the CBI. And that involves trade preferences, and they were augmented with the passage of the Caribbean Basin Economic Recovery Act, as well as the Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Act, and then for Haiti, the Hope and Help programs. So those are, powerful tools in that sense to promote the economic development of some of our closest neighbors. And I had mentioned earlier, promoting our positive economic agenda in the region, which allows us to be the partner of choice. There is one initiative that is very new and was announced by the White House just in April, and that is the SALPI, the Small and Less Populous Island Economies Initiative. And that initiative will group the activities of approximately 29 U.S. government agencies and departments. And so it'll be a method of coordinating what we do across the U.S. government vis-a-vis economic development in the region.
Would it be possible, and you can do so in a letter, I don't need it today, rattle off the names of the islands, but if you could perhaps send our office or put into the record via writing what the names of those islands, countries are.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yes, we will do.
I think, Mr. Chairman, I'm over, so.
Ms. Fulton, we're putting together a CODEL. That's fine. Yeah. Thank God it's not an evacuation. We're planning a CODEL, and we're going down first to Southcom. I was wondering if you can tell me what we can ask, what we can expect, when we get down there. I've been there once before, and obviously security is a big concern, and trafficking is a big concern. So.
No more so than 295?
Right, yeah, right. That you got. So if you have any suggestions, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think that it would be, I think your visit would be welcome, and I know that the leadership at Southcom would be happy to provide you with an overview of their activities and their efforts to partner with Caribbean nations to improve their security and domain awareness. We coordinate closely with Southcom, and there are a variety of efforts underway that I'm sure that they would be happy to brief you on in greater detail in preparation for that trip as you determine where to go. And as we talked yesterday, we'll be happy to provide a list of suggestions. I think that the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Jamaica would probably be I would recommend them being at the top of your list. But I think we'll get back to you in a more fulsome way with some suggestions for your consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you again for joining us. As I said at the beginning of this hearing, I believe we need to take immediate steps to distribute vaccines directly to the Caribbeans. I look forward to working with Ranking Member Green and our colleagues to deepen U.S. engagement with the Caribbean and elevate the Caribbean as a priority for U.S. foreign policy and national security. With that, the committee is adjourned. Thank you.